I started speaking as if I were finally admitting a truth I had avoided for too long, letting each memory unfold exactly as it happened, without hiding behind excuses or unnecessary detours. It began on a day that looked ordinary to everyone else, but inside my home, nothing felt ordinary anymore. My partner had become a familiar stranger, someone I shared a roof with but rarely shared a moment with. He carried stress like a second skin, brushing past me in the mornings, collapsing into silence at night. I kept trying to reach him, trying to revive conversations that used to come effortlessly, but every effort felt like pouring water into sand. Eventually, I stopped breaking the silence because silence at least didn't reject me back. That was around the time I noticed him, quiet, withdrawn, clearly carrying something heavy, though he tried to hide it from everyone. I didn't know him well, but the way he moved told me more than his words ever did. People passed by him without seeing the exhaustion in his eyes, the uncertainty in his voice whenever he tried to appear okay. I didn't plan to get involved. I only asked if he was all right because no one else seemed to. He hesitated, then admitted he wasn't fine at all. Something in me softened instantly. Maybe it was empathy, maybe it was the reflection of my own isolation, but I told him if he needed help, he could ask. At first, it was small things, listening to him talk through a problem, giving advice, encouraging him to take a breath when everything felt overwhelming. I didn't expect him to trust me as quickly as he did, but he did. Maybe he needed someone. Maybe I needed to be needed. Our conversations stretched longer each day, not because we planned them but because neither of us stopped. I found myself looking forward to hearing his voice, to seeing that faint sense of relief he got when he realized I genuinely cared. Somewhere along the way, I felt warmth that startled me. It wasn't dramatic, just a quiet awareness that I wasn't invisible to him. He listened, truly listened when I spoke. He noticed when I looked tired, when my voice cracked, when I tried to laugh off things that hurt. He noticed things my own partner hadn't seen in months. I told myself I was only helping him. I told myself kindness wasn't a crime. But deep down I felt the shift, the thin thread tightening between us with every shared moment. The worst part was how natural it felt. Nothing forced. Nothing planned. Just two people finding comfort where they least expected it. Yet, I knew comfort could be dangerous. One afternoon, when he thanked me softly and held my gaze a moment too long, I felt guilt hit me hard and fast. I shouldn't have liked how it felt. I shouldn't have cared that much. But I did. And that was the first moment I realized I wasn't just helping him anymore. I was drifting slowly, quietly, toward something I wasn't supposed to feel at all. I kept telling myself that what was happening between us was harmless, that I was only being supportive, that anyone in my position would have done the same. But the more I tried to frame it as simple kindness, the more obvious it became that the connection growing between us wasn't simple at all. It started showing in the way my day quietly rearranged itself around the possibility of hearing from him. If I saw his name light up my screen, a part of me softened in a way I couldn't explain even to myself. I didn't want to admit that I was waiting for it, but I was. And he knew it too, maybe not from my words, but from the way I never failed to reply. He began sharing things gradually, as if testing whether I would disappear once the weight of his truth became too much. But I didn't leave. I couldn't. He would open up about doubts he never voiced to anyone, fears he thought made him weak, regrets he carried quietly. Every confession made him feel more real, more human, more vulnerable in a way that drew me in without my permission. I told him he wasn't alone. I meant it more than I should have. Our conversation shifted in tone without either of us acknowledging it. We still talked about his struggles, but now we talked about mine too, about how unseen I felt, how exhausting it was to hold everything together, how loneliness didn't always come from being by yourself. He listened with a sincerity I hadn't felt in months. He didn't interrupt, didn't dismiss, didn't tell me I was being dramatic. He remembered details, small ones I'd forgotten I even mentioned. And every time he repeated something back to me, I felt a strange mix of relief and guilt. There were moments when the air between us grew heavier, charged with something unspoken. It might have been the way he looked at me when I said something that resonated with him, or the way his tone softened whenever he sensed my voice trembling. Once, when I handed him something and our fingers brushed, the faint hesitation in both our movements said more than either of us would ever dare to. I pulled my hand back too quickly, pretending the moment didn't exist, but my heart didn't cooperate. I tried creating distance, telling myself I needed space to think clearly. But all it took was one message from him, one simple "Are you okay today?" to pull me right back in. He didn't ask anything inappropriate. He didn't cross any lines. It was the emotional closeness that became the problem, the comfort, the gentle support, the trust one shouldn't have been offering so freely. I started hiding my phone without realizing it, responding only when no one else was looking, adjusting my day so no one would question who I was talking to. I wasn't doing anything wrong. At least that's what I kept repeating. But the way my heartbeat changed when he reached out told a different story. I knew we were moving towards something neither of us had explicitly invited, yet both of us kept allowing. The line between helping him and feeling something for him was no longer a line at all. It was a blur I kept stepping into, hoping no one, especially myself, would notice. I told myself that I still had control, that everything was manageable as long as we didn't acknowledge the tension resting quietly between us. But control is a fragile thing, and mine began slipping the moment our conversation stopped feeling like simple exchanges and started feeling like confessions. He trusted me with parts of himself he didn't show the world, his disappointments, the way he feared starting over, the guilt he carried for things he couldn't change. I listened because that's what I'd been doing from the start, but somewhere along the way, listening stopped being an act of kindness and became an emotional anchor neither of us admitted we were holding on to. He began depending on me in ways that felt uncomfortably close to how someone relies on a partner. When something went wrong, I was his first message. When something went right, he wanted me to be the first to know. He said my words brought him calm, that my presence made everything lighter, that he didn't understand how someone like me could appear at the exact moment he needed support the most. I knew the implication behind those words, even if he didn't say it directly, and I felt it too. That was the part that terrified me. One evening, he reached out sounding more shaken than usual. Something had gone wrong. Something he didn't want to talk about over the phone. Without thinking, I went to check on him. I told myself it was only concern, nothing more. But the moment I saw how defeated he looked, the moment he lifted his head and met my eyes with that mixture of vulnerability and relief, something inside me tightened. He didn't need to say anything. The silence between us said enough. We sat together, talking quietly, our words softer than they had ever been. He admitted he felt like he was losing his grip on everything, that he didn't know how to keep going some days. I told him he wasn't alone, that he didn't have to face everything by himself. He looked at me then with a gratitude so raw it felt like a confession. The room felt smaller, the air warmer, and for a moment it wasn't just comfort we were sharing. It was something dangerously close to crossing a boundary I wasn't sure I could come back from. When he reached for my hand, it was instinct more than intention. His touch wasn't bold or reckless. It was hesitant, searching, asking for reassurance more than anything else. And for a second I didn't pull away. I felt the weight of the moment settle between us. The recognition that this single gesture held more meaning than any message or conversation we'd shared before. I let myself feel it, just for that second, before reality snapped me back. I pulled my hand away gently, not out of anger but out of fear. Fear of what might happen if I didn't. Fear of how close we already were to losing control entirely. He apologized immediately, but his eyes told the truth. The bond between us had grown far beyond what either of us could pretend it was. I left shortly after, my heart heavy with a mixture of guilt, longing, and a realization I didn't want to face. Helping him had led me to a place I never intended to go. And resisting him now felt less like making a choice and more like fighting against a tide that refused to let me stand still. I woke the next morning with a heaviness that settled deeper than anything I had felt before. The moment kept replaying in my mind, not because something dramatic had happened but because of how close it came to happening. That single second of hesitation, of letting myself feel something I shouldn't have felt, was enough to shake the ground beneath me. I realized that I had reached a point where pretending it was harmless was no longer possible. I had allowed an emotional closeness that didn't belong to him, and the weight of that truth pressed against my chest in a way I could no longer ignore. I knew I had to make a choice, and neither option felt easy. On one hand, there was the comfort I found with him, the ease, the understanding, the feeling of being seen again. On the other hand was the life I had built with my partner. A life that had grown distant but not broken. A life that still deserved honesty even if it lacked warmth. I had been living in a space between both worlds, holding on to something that wasn't mine while avoiding the responsibility of facing what I was losing at home. The first step was distance. I didn't message him the way I used to. I didn't respond immediately. I didn't let the conversation stretch into hours. He noticed almost instantly. His messages shifted from casual to concerned, asking if he had done something wrong, if he had crossed a line I couldn't forgive. I stared at his words, knowing how easily I could reassure him, how easily I could fall back into the comfort he offered. But reassurance would only pull us deeper, and I couldn't allow that anymore. When I finally replied, I kept it brief, telling him I needed space to think. Not because of him, but because of myself. He didn't push, but the hurt showed through his silence. I felt it too. Creating distance from someone who had become part of my emotional routine felt like losing a limb. But I knew it was necessary. The connection we formed had grown beyond support, beyond friendship, beyond anything that could coexist with loyalty. At home, my partner finally started noticing the shift, not because he knew what was happening, but because he sensed something pulling me inward. He began asking questions, offering help in small ways he hadn't in months. Maybe it was guilt, maybe it was awareness, maybe it was fear of losing me. But for the first time in a long time, he tried. And I realized that some part of me had been waiting for that effort, even when I convinced myself I was done hoping for it. I chose to lean into rebuilding, not because the other connection wasn't real, but because chasing it would only lead to consequences neither of us deserved. I needed to reclaim parts of myself I had given away too easily, parts that belonged to my commitment, not my loneliness. I sent him one final message, grateful, honest, respectful, telling him that he mattered, that he helped me more than he realized, but that we needed to step back before we both crossed a line we couldn't undo. He understood, even though it hurt. The story didn't end with dramatic confessions or perfect resolutions. It ended quietly, with two people walking away from a bond that almost became something else. I learned that infidelity doesn't always begin with touch. Sometimes it begins with attention, with comfort, with feeling seen by the wrong person at the right time. And sometimes resisting isn't about strength. It's about recognizing the cost of giving in. I wanted to help him. I did. But somewhere in the process, I realized I needed to save myself too.